what ambition has meant is really sitting down and defining, like, what does my ambition get me, right? And what am I willing to do for me to reach the highest version of success for me? That became very clear that these are non-negotiables. And I think more of us need to sit down and have that conversation with ourselves and with the people we love.
Welcome to Work Unscripted. I'm your host, Marlo Lyons. I'm here to toss aside the corporate scripts for unfiltered truths. We are tackling real work challenges with no sugarcoating, providing you with the strategies to thrive and find fulfillment in your career. It's time to turn the page. It's time to be unscripted. Today's episode will make you rethink everything you know about success. My guest, Ruchika Malhotra. She's a global inclusion strategist and author, and her new book, Uncompete, is a powerful call to reject competition as the default way to measure our worth. We talk about how the culture of competition drives burnout and bias and exclusion, and how redefining success through collaboration, generosity, and joy can transform both your career and your team. If you've ever felt like you're winning on paper but burning out on the inside, this conversation is your reminder there's another way. Let's get unscripted. Ruchika, welcome to the show.
Marlo, so excited to be here. Thank you.
I am so excited to talk to you because I read this book in 2 days. It was a phenomenal book, and I think it's a book everybody needs to read. And the book, what's so interesting about it is that it challenges something that all of us have accepted as fact, that competition is natural, that it's necessary, and it's good for us. But your book, Uncompete, makes the case that competition is actually learned and harmful. And I feel like this is kind of a revolutionary concept, kind of seeking to uncompete as a way of finding peace. So I want to go back to the moment that this concept just hit you and said, this is going to be the title of the book. This is what I need to write about. Tell me about that. What happened in your life?
Yeah, thank you, Marlo. I think the seeds were planted early in general. I grew up in Singapore to immigrant Indian parents, and this idea that you have to, beat out the competition, you got to be better than everyone else. The way to success is through education and getting a good job. Like, those ideas were drilled in very early in my life, as well as growing up in a country which is described as going from third world to first world within a few decades. Singapore's sort of success story financially is one that's well documented. So those ideas were always there. I saw two very differing sort of perspectives on competition and how to approach the world between my parents. My father was competition at all costs, scarcity thinking, elbow others out of the way to get ahead. My mother was much more like just literally the opposite. So much more focused on collaboration and community building and taking care of others. So I really saw that dichotomy was very clear in my life early in my life. When I come out into the workplace, certainly in Western workplaces, I've worked in Singapore and the UK. I did a short stint as a journalist in Mumbai, and then I came here to the United States and have worked in different cities around this country. And what I found again and again in workplaces was, again, those same ideas of competition to get ahead. You got to be better than your competitors. Your rivals are all around you, especially as you're starting out. Like, if you want to get promoted, you got to be better than the person next to you, even if, you may have come in and been their best friend. A lot of the questions I'm now answering is like, what happens when your boss and you are pitted against each other for the next job? For example, the person who nurtured you and mentored you and got you to where you are, and suddenly you're supposed to be rivals. So, I saw like pieces of that, and those threads, those seeds sort of were littered throughout my life. But I would say the big change that happened to me is, and when I came up with like this idea of uncompete, has really been through my work as a DEI practitioner. And actually at a time where DEI was, sort of very much in trend, and people were talking about the importance of creating inclusive workplaces. My own services were very much in demand. And I remember coming off this huge, like 1,000-person conference I'd been invited to speak at for my last book, Inclusion on Purpose. And one of the questions that came up after I got off stage was from someone really well-meaning who said, I love this idea of DEI. I love this idea of like, yes, we need to create an inclusive workplace. But, at the end of the day, like, I don't want to fall on the sword. And I certainly don't want like the next generation. I don't want my kids, my sort of people like me to fall on the sword. So does DEI mean like I as a white man or, people like me are not going to get opportunities? And I just couldn't get that framing of like this as inclusion or people belonging or people having leadership or people having opportunities as a zero-sum thing. And I kind of heard different ideas related to this thread everywhere around my DEI practice. Again, where it was like, I really believe in this in theory, but in practice, does a women's leadership program mean the men are now going to stop being leaders, right? Like, yes, we might want to bring in more neurodivergence or neurodiversity, but like, that's not going to be good for folks who aren't neurodiverse. So do we really need to do this? And that sort of seeded in me. I think it sort of brought together actually all the seeds that had been planted.
And this really goes to scarcity. Like the way you phrased that question was, does that mean that I'm out as a white male, saying there's not enough to go around, right? Like there's not enough accolades, there's not enough promotions, there's not enough success. So therefore we need to compete with each other because there's never enough. I mean, if you think about even just promotions in the office, usually they can only promote up to maybe 3% at any one time, right? So there really isn't enough. But people benefit from this illusion, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They do. And I think I don't blame anyone for it, right? Like I understand if you have been taught there's only one promotion, you got to get your sharp elbows out, of course, right? And then when you factor in various biases in society, sexism and patriarchy, racism and other biases, it sort of turbocharges. And I remember talking to someone even for the book who said, what she was in a sales role, which was like very, very competitive. But she said like she would notice, and she identifies as a Black woman. So she would say, I would notice that the guys would compete with each other, but it was very friendly. And at the end of it, they could go back and, hang out, play golf, be friends at the end of whoever won sort of the largest accounts.
Not women.
Not women.
Doesn't work like that. Nope.
Women. And she said, I was specifically pitted against the other Black woman to be sort of rivals and be sort of pitted against each other. And so we have to also understand how much like our systems play into us believing competition is the only way. If you've been taught there's only like one role for success or one role to VP, of course you're going to think that there is scarcity. And I think some of this is reframing that too.
So your book is broken down into 3 parts. The first part is choice. And I guess where I got a little bit stuck was, if others are competing against me, don't I need to compete back? Like I can make the choice not to compete, but won't I be left behind?
Yeah. I think this is going to be a question that I'm going to get throughout the book process. And I totally understand where it comes from. I think that some of what this question, where it comes from, is understanding that like, what are we actually fighting for? What do we actually want in our lives, right? And what does being left behind mean? I think sometimes there's this belief that success can only look a very certain way. There's a very narrow definition for success. And what I'm trying to do here is to really have more of us pause, including people like myself who are taught that there's a very narrow definition and a very small way to be successful. And if you don't do that, you're out. And so much of my sort of later life work and the career that I'm trying to build is actually pushing back against those toxic ideas that like, if there's only one promotion and I don't get it, there's something wrong with me. I'm being left behind versus, is this the right time for me for that promotion? Is this what I really want? Does it actually like fit into my life goals, or am I pursuing this because it's someone else's goals for me or someone else's definition of success for me?
Yeah, that person is succeeding, that person's moving ahead, but maybe that's not even what I want. That's what's so interesting. There's a jealousy component to this in a way, or a I wish I had. This even goes to, I remember somebody posting on like a social media site. Is it bad that I feel horrible that everybody's taking their kids on vacation this summer and I can't afford it? Right? Like there's this comparison. That's the word I'm looking for. Comparison that we all do with each other. And that's one of your biggest points is do not compare. Like you've got to figure out what's important to you, right?
Yeah. What totally. And while accepting and trying to shed a light that I think, again, by no means am I the first person to do this, but shed a light on how much the way that digital systems, especially social media, has been set up to foster incredible amounts of comparison and envy. So just to put it in perspective, so like social comparison is what makes us human, right? It's very natural. It's normal. It's why, when two babies or two kids or like little toddlers are together in the daycare, they can look at each other and they can be like, hey, oh, so that's how you walk. Okay, let me try and walk, right? Like, let me compare my walk to their walk, that sort of thing. Very, very normal, very human. What social media has done is taken these very human tendencies and really turbocharged the comparison and the envy that makes us, again, just normal, just human, and like to a level that can be extremely debilitating. Like we look at the levels of anxiety in especially younger generation, but even older people. And that is very much linked to social media use. And I think there's a lot more that we need to challenge around that. And I do try and do that. So yes, that comparison, I understand it. And also the understanding of how much social media is actually set up. And many of these companies very much benefit from you going down that rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, this person is doing amazing. Oh my gosh, this person is on this incredible vacation. And here I am not doing that, or I can't afford it. So I am so much worse than them.
And I think that's where a lot of the hardship comes in, right? Like that's where professionals even face hardship in their jobs because they're so conditioned to believe that our failure is because we're not doing more, we're not doing better, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're not making more money, we're not, working on the big project or the big visible thing. But you're saying to do the opposite. That's what you're saying about making the choice, is to collaborate, not compete. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. And I want to really talk about how this is a choice, right? Because again, the default is the opposite. The default is rather than figuring out ways to collaborate with each other, we got to fight with each other. And what bothers me is that the opportunity cost for it is actually really, really great. When I think back to some of the most regretful moments I have in a corporate career, when I was actually working not for myself, but for a corporation, almost all of them have been around relationships being mismanaged, right? So either me competing with someone who, was either at the same quote unquote level as me, or a mentor, or someone who at one point brought me in, hired me into the organization, and then me feeling like, oh no, I gotta like upstage
ramp up. Yep, ramp up.
That's what it means to be ambitious and successful. It has meant, really not giving space to other people to show up as full humans. And this is where like that work in inclusion and equity has been very important to me. I remember, and not one of my proud moments at all. And this was actually outside of a corporation, but I had hired someone to work on a project for me. And at that time, I wasn't a mother, and they, were very honest, like, hey, I'm dealing with all these things, including and really telling you how unproud I feel, like ashamed I feel. They had a child who also had disabilities, and essentially had to keep pushing back lots of the deadlines that we had agreed upon. And by the end of it, I couldn't help but feeling like, oh, this person's just not committed to my project. And I made this huge mistake by hiring them. And, again, not at all, not even close to one of my finest moments. But where did that come from? It came from this idea of like, if we're not constantly producing, you don't want it bad enough. And so I think that thinking about how much more of this is a choice, understanding that it actually is a choice, even if it's not the easy one. In fact, it's usually the hardest one. On top of that, what's the opportunity cost, both to yourself as personally, health, mental peace, all of those things, actual career success as defined by you versus living up to someone else's definitions, but also what is the opportunity cost of relationships you lose along the way? I think those are the questions that we should be asking, especially when you are, thinking about leadership and have leadership roles sort of in your sights.
Well, then what advice would you give someone who feels stuck between wanting to be ambitious, but yet they realize, hey, my values don't really align, and I want peace, and I want equity, and I want inclusion, but I also want to make more money, and I want to show that I'm ambitious, or I want to show that I want to climb the corporate ladder, and they just are in conflict?
I think they're in conflict, but I think more people would benefit from realizing how they're not opposite to each other. So, for example, I want to make good money. I really, really want to be seen as someone who is very effective and very productive. I'm extremely ambitious. I write about this in the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my ambitious goals, actually, the things that I prioritize as success most to myself were things I could never articulate until I really sat down and started doing the work to decolonize my mind and start to uncompete. For example, yes, money is really important to me, but also like really for a successful career for me personally, it's being able to take vacation when I need to. It's being able to spend time with people I love. It's being able to do things. I mean, I write about this in the book. Like for me, I come from a culture where your afternoon meal is sacred, where lunch is sacred. You go with your colleagues, you build rapport together. The sad desk lunch situation that we have here
Been there.
In the West, is actually for me like a failure, right? Like I can see other people do it. Good for you if you're willing to do that because making more money is more important to you. But I think for me, what ambition has meant is really sitting down and defining like what does my ambition get me, right? And what am I willing to do for me to reach the highest version of like success for me. And I think for me that became very clear that these are non-negotiables. And I think more of us need to sit down and have that conversation with ourselves and with the people we love.
And that's part of the problem, right? A lot of people don't pause and they're just on this hamster wheel and they're going 1,000 miles a minute and they wonder why they're not happy. Like, hey, I'm making a lot of money. Hey, I'm able to go on vacation. Hey, I'm able to do all these things and I'm still not happy and I'm still exhausted. And I think part of that is that they don't realize that this is not a reactive thing you're asking them to do. It's proactive. To uncompete, to not compete anymore is a proactive choice. And that means what you talk about in the book, which I loved, was talking about this, moving from this scarcity mindset to this abundance mindset. Can you explain a little bit about that and like in the context of the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So a scarcity mindset, very simply put, is believing that there is a scarcity of resources and that you really need to it's finite and you really have to sort of guard it or you have to fight for it. And that's a scarcity mindset, especially in the workplace. An abundance mindset is believing that there is very much enough opportunities. There's an abundance of opportunities, an abundance of everything we need to have a successful workplace here. And so there's no need to operate with that frugality of that, sort of jealously guard, push people out of the way sort of focus. And so the way I'm thinking about it and the way that I'm advising my clients and even having conversations around it in the workplace is this question of, okay, if indeed you want to, create, for example, whatever your business goals are, whatever your business goals might be, what can you do to make sure that you create a team around it where everyone has an opportunity to serve themselves towards these business goals, right? And I think one of the challenges I've faced when I talk to organization leaders is, again, there can only be one person leading this project. And I'm like, but why? How did we come to that mindset? And asking questions. And indeed, sometimes there isn't. Like truly, there can only be one project leader because that's the way certain systems have been set up. However, many times when people dig a little deeper, they realize that no, we're just doing it this way because it's always been done this way. And actually having, for example, co-leaders for a project could get us to meet our business goals even faster, for example. Or this idea that like you only get a raise if you hit these KPIs, but all the other work, and we know this, I think, Marlo, you and I can talk about this ad nauseum, the way that so many times the quote unquote soft skills to keep things running well that a lot of women historically do within an organization are just as important, right? And I remember years ago when I was writing an article, I think it was for HBR, someone reached out to me and said, I work for a tech team. I'm an engineer. I'm a woman engineer. I love what I do. And my work is constantly being the sort of glue between the very sort of, left brain, largely male engineers and everyone else in the organization.
In
and
business, right.
Yet the only way our organization promotes people is based on how many lines of code I write. I don't have enough time to write as many lines of code because I'm not out there being a jerk to everyone. Like I'm trying to be the glue that actually allows us to have the customers and the stakeholders we need, but that's never recognized.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that we have to figure out what individually will make us happy. But at the same time, in order to have success in the office, we have to kind of create this collective power, which is what you talk about.
Yes.
But we all don't have to agree necessarily. We just have to kind of all be working toward this collective good. And I've worked in HR. That's always the mantra of every company, is that we're all working in service of the business, right? But we don't really see it much. We see teams grasping at resources and fighting for this project and fighting for the credit over here and fighting for this. If we all just stop doing that, does that mean envy, resentment, everything goes away? All of a sudden it's kumbaya?
Definitely not. And I want to be realistic, because having been a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner for a long time, that is the opposite of diversity done well. Actually, what is so powerful about harnessing diversity, and really a lot of the research is focused specifically on racial diversity within organizations, but part of harnessing it so well to actually be more innovative and produce more growth is related to that very normal, healthy, productive tension and harnessing it correctly. So your perspective will be very different from my perspective. We may have very different backgrounds. We may have very different worldviews. But how do you engage productively towards something that is a common goal? And of course, there will be envy, there will be resentment, there will be all of that. Come on, we're human beings, right? But I think so much of what we do is have this go on autopilot, because that's just the way the systems have been set up, rather than, again, what you said is that pause is so meaningful and powerful. And what I've started to see, when I've researched organizations like Patagonia is considered one of those gold standards that has always and in various different ways, and in ways that may not even seem related, but they're one of the first organizations that had a school and daycare on site so that their employees would be able to kind of integrate work and life on the one hand. And then on the other, there's so much of work they've done around planet over profit. That is so much part of their mantra and how they show up. And that has meant, their founders, Yvonne Chouinard, has talked so much extensively about how so often doing the right things, it did lead to profit, but not the next day. It requires that long-term thinking. And I think that's really what I'm trying to encourage more of us to do.
Yeah, I've had a front row seat to this a lot when I've been doing team coaching, right? A front row seat to how teams compete with each other and how they're not working toward the common good of what is the goal? What is the business goal? What is the company's goal? Where are we headed? And I think that I wonder if leaders just aren't equipped to instill how not to compete between teams and to build curiosity, within the team, to be like, hey, if they're doing something that feels like it's competing with you, be curious about that. Maybe they're not competing at all, right? How are we all working toward this common goal? I think there's a lot of talk, but I'm not sure leaders know how to do that. Do you have any guidance for leaders on how to instill, uncompeting? I know it's not really a word. You came up with the word, but uncompeting on a team?
Well, I have to say that I think the number one thing I will say, though, is, Marlo, on this is the idea that I I don't think we even talk about how competition is a marker of success. Like when I go around talking to people, when I've surveyed, just even verbally, I've gone around and I've asked, especially people in HR, especially people, working in organizations, I'm like, what are the unspoken rules of success on this team or at this organization? People will say things like, oh, a culture of respect, a culture of like empathy, a culture of trust, like
Mhm.
all. I see you doing the
Yep,
like.
all the talk, but it doesn't mean anything, right?
I'll say, what about competition? And it's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, isn't this an unspoken rule of success? Like, you got to be competitive to win here. And then when you pull that thread, it's like, oh my gosh, you're so right. So I think one of the the number one way that I would encourage leaders to even think about this, team leaders, is to actually name the thing. Like, hey, like we have historically had a very a culture of competition on this team. It has led to burnout. It has led to us not being able to meet the goals we want to. It has often meant undercutting ourselves. I mean, what I see very, very commonly in the work I do is a lot of siloing, right? Because team A is worried that team B is going to lionize what they're doing, even though they're working on the same project, right? And so, or the same outcome. And so I think a big part of this is actually being able to name competition as one of those, you know, unspoken but very prevalent rules of success or rules of engagement that are common at that organization or team. And then being able to demonstrate curiosity, like, why is it happening? Are there certain actors or are there certain systems that are creating this to be more, common than others?
Let me throw a zinger at you now. So what if it's your boss, right? Your boss is competing
Well,
against you. And I've seen this because I work with leaders and their boss is doing this. They are leaving them out of meetings. They are putting them in a corner. They're not including them in important, documents or information. What do you do in that scenario when your boss feels like you're basically outshining them? And so they're competing with you to keep their own job, even though you're not competing with them and you're just trying to do your job.
Yeah. This is such a good question. And I'll start by saying there's no easy answers, right? It's easy for me with the privilege I have and not working within an organization and being able to choose my clients and the folks I engage with to say like, oh, just forget it, like leave it, like quit your job. That's like the most important thing that you could do for your mental peace. By the way, yes, I think mental peace is extremely important. And that is very much something I recommend to people, especially those experiencing severe burnout and chronic illness, which actually very much there's no solid data to show this, but there's so much of overlap between people having extremely toxic, extremely competitive environments and facing a lot of the health concerns and health ramifications of that, both mental.
Absolutely.
So I do want to, I kind of want to name that on right off the bat by saying like, if that's a possibility, that might be that might be an option, then please exercise it, right, for your mental peace. But if not, one of the ways that I've found some level of, again, and this relates to how much like competition is inbuilt and we don't even think about it. There are times I've seen success where someone was able to sit down with their boss and say like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Like when this happens and I use the SBI framework, like this situation happened, this is the behavior, this is the impact it had on me. Here's what I interpret as happening. I think there might be some competition or some feeling of like, I don't know, resentment going on here. Tell me if I'm wrong, right? And like be really vulnerable and open about it. And I've seen success there. I've seen people actually turn around and say, oh my goodness, like I didn't even think of it, right? I just thought like that's just the way, that's just my way of being, or that's just the way I thought success is sort of happens, because we're also conditioned to believe in competition as that unspoken, unsaid rule of success that I got to compete with whoever I think is coming near me and guard sort of my territory. I would say that's probably the most effective way, but unfortunately, not all bosses and not everyone is self-aware enough to have that conversation. And if it's really, really causing, wreaking havoc on you, I also recommend, seeing if you could be reassigned to a different team.
So if I'm going to proactively uncompete, I would think that the very first way to do that would be to advocate for others, right? To help them be better at their job. And I've worked with leaders on this. I know you're working with somebody and they're not competent or they're not doing a good job or they're insecure, whatever their problem is. But if you advocate for them and you help them be better, it actually empowers yourself as well. Can you maybe share an example of what you've seen out there and how that helps?
I love that. I mean, one of the key ways that I found a lot of success around uncompeting, both in the workplace as well as in your general, in your friendships and your personal relationships, has been around a concept called amplification. It was popularized by the staffers during one of our previous presidential administrations, the Obama administration, where female staffers were realizing that when they said something, it was constantly being talked over and sort of ignored by the male staffers. So they banded together to make sure that if one female staffer had an idea, another one would quickly jump in and be like, "Oh, that was a great idea, Marlo. I'm so glad you said that. Let me build upon that." So you give credit and then you build upon it. And that is called amplification.
I love that.
I love it so much. I love it. And I love it because it very much relates to the work I've done around equity and inclusion. And it very much relates to creating a culture of collaboration, of innovation too, because a lot of fantastic ideas, I don't know if you've seen it. I'm not going to name any on these podcasts, but I don't know if you've seen some of those gaffes where people, a huge budget, like marketing budget, PR budget, like a big ad campaign goes live. And you look at it and you're like, whoa, like what were people thinking?
Yeah, exactly. What happened there and how did that get through, right?
Through. And you realize it's because probably there was someone, I'm sure there was someone who was like raising the alarm, but nobody listened, right? So this idea of amplification also allows us to make sure that great ideas don't get unsaid. It creates a culture of collaboration. It allows me to say, as for example, if we're working at the same organization, it allows me to say, Marlo, I love this idea that you're talking about. I'm going to build on it and immediately establish camaraderie and collaboration rather than competition.
Yeah. That acknowledgement alone, right? Even from a coaching perspective, when you acknowledge somebody, I mean, nobody feels acknowledged these days, but just that acknowledgement of, hey, that's a great idea. Here, what do you think about this? And then you're building upon it. I mean, that's the perfect example of collaboration and helping somebody feel heard, feel seen, right? In the moment.
I love that, Marlo. And I have to say, I think that there's this belief sometimes I hear that, this idea of acknowledgement and validation is a new concept. Whereas in actual fact, I mean, I remember watching that episode, I think probably 20 years ago, of Oprah Winfrey saying, I've interviewed everyone except God, literally. And this is me paraphrasing, but from Tom Cruise to the Dalai Lama to the presidents and every single person, once they're off stage, backstage, they turn to her and they're like, was I okay? And we're talking about billionaires and world leaders and all of that. Like all of us,
we crave it.
We crave it. And we
need it.
As social animals, again, back to that social comparison, we want to be seen by our peers. So for so many of us, when we go through a workplace culture, which is competitive, which is zero sum, which is winner takes all, where we celebrate certain people and everyone else just isn't as good, we create a deeper craving for that acknowledgement. So as leaders who can operate as coaches, I think that is one of the most powerful things we can do. Even if it seems like a small microaction, it actually has huge ripple effects.
Huge impact on people. And I don't think leaders realize just how much a simple acknowledgement means so much to any employee. Absolutely. The third part of this book, so resistance. And this is not what I think people are going to expect. Because when I opened it and I saw the third part of the book, I'm thinking, oh, what if people are resistant to uncompeting? But that's not what you're talking about here. You're talking about using resistance as in resisting a system that sets us up to compete. And that means liberating our minds, liberating our souls, our bodies from competing. So how do we do that if we're stuck in the system that expects us to compete with each other?
Yeah, I thank you for asking this question. And I think we jumped to this early in our conversation because I think it's full circle. So it starts off very early in the approach to competition. Like, okay, if not competition, then does that mean that like I can't be ambitious or like I can't be successful? And I think I really came back to it as a circular sort of argument towards the end as well, like trying to sort of close the loop there, in that actually so much of us resisting the system does require us to really define success for ourselves. It really requires us to ask, like, which of what has been set up as having a successful career or having a successful life actually matches what I deeply inside want. If I remove all those voices in my head, all the conditioning, business school or what my family said or what like my neighbors are doing or what my colleague or what my boss expects of me, if I take all of that away, like what is it that I really want? And what you realize is actually with the levels of chronic illness, of rising sort of disability and, all sorts of workplace related like traumas and stresses in our body, what you realize is there is a huge opportunity here to say, actually, success could mean for me that I don't work, 24 hours a day for 3 nights a week for me to be successful. Maybe successful today means that I'm able to really choose what I want to work on which clients I want to work with, or which colleagues that I want to build a relationship with. Maybe that's success to me. And I think it takes some time to get there, especially to decondition what we've learned.
I think sometimes success is being able to leave work early enough to get to your kid's basketball game. I think that could be success sometimes, right? It could be that I didn't work after dinner, right?
And I love you said that, because if you take a full circle holistic approach to your work as a facet of your life and not your entire life, if you actually connect it to, like, I remember watching these videos of people who are basically hospice care workers, right? And day in and day out deal with people who are on their deathbeds. Nobody, and I know we know this in our souls, nobody says, I wish I worked more, or, oh, damn, I left work early so that I could go to my kids' basketball games. I shouldn't have. Nobody does that. And I think so much of that resistance is saying, I'm not going to engage in short-term thinking, the next promotion, the next opportunity, the next amount of money that I'm going to make. I'm going to actually look at my life in a holistic point of view, with a holistic lens, and ask, what does success look like? And what do I have to resist? What do I have to give up? Because by no means am I saying like, oh yes, you can make all the money in the world and you can go to every single basketball game. But I think it's important to ask yourself, when I go down this path, am I really listening to myself, or am I listening to a preconditioned idea of success?
I think that goes to a lot of what you've been saying about the physical ailments that people have. I don't think people realize how much stress causes physical ailment. I mean, when I think about competition, I always think of the Olympics, right? That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I think about how much they put their bodies through, right? Just to compete on that world stage. But I don't think people realize that relates to us as well. Like, we're just normal folk out there, right? And competing in life can put so much stress on your own body as well, and create those aches, those pains, that inflammation, all the things that you don't realize is coming from the competition.
I think I want to add to that. You're so right. And I also, when you said Olympics and sports people, what came to mind is what isn't discussed is how much elite athletes build in both rest as well as extremely important ways of taking care of their bodies and health in a way that us as quote unquote normal folks don't. Right? Like I had the very, amazing privilege of, I'm yoga teacher certified. I had the amazing privilege of one of my yoga teachers being Elena Chung, who was Russell Wilson's personal yoga teacher, who was our quarterback here in Seattle Seahawks, during the season here. And what you realize is, like, yes, people like that who are elite athletes who do these, all these amazing things, they have a lot of self-care built into their routine. They put their bodies and their minds through a lot, and they also have extremely important ways of making sure that they condition that in their off season and their off time too, which again, us as quote unquote normal folks don't. How many of us pull all-nighters in the beginning? It's like, oh, one off, this one project, this one thing, or answer emails. We're like, no, it's just today that we have to answer emails, right, at 7 p.m. And then it becomes a habit. Then it's 9 p.m. Then it's midnight. So I think that's something I always try and say. Like, yes, elite athletes, amazing examples, but also remember how many resources, many of them, I mean, their coaches literally force them to rest and sleep.
Yeah. It's
Right.
called recovery. Yeah, it's called recovery. And we don't do recovery in real life. We just keep going and we keep charging forward until we get sick. Have you noticed in your own life, like a time when your body told you, hey, you just got to stop?
All the time. All the time, unfortunately. And I think especially, as we're talking, with this book tour, I think I have to remind myself, because that was a mistake I made with my last book, with Inclusion on Purpose, where I totally, again, with that ambition of like, I want this book to be successful. That means no matter what, I have to get on a plane, no matter at all hours of day or night. I have to work through illness. I have to work through not being able to see the doctor when I needed to. I very much need to take my own advice when it comes to this book tour.
That's the hardest thing, taking your own advice. You talk about redefining success. And I'm curious, with this book tour, just with your future, like how are you now looking at your success versus, say, from 5 years ago? How has this book even changed you and how you look at your own passions and ambition?
You ask such good questions, Marlo. Honestly, for me, and this is the difference between writing like a straight out business/leadership book and one that really, I hope, prompts more of us just to get curious and ask better questions. And even if that means that once you've asked those questions, you've done some reflection, you're like, actually, there's not much action I can take. To me, that's less important than you sitting down and having a moment to really just reflect, like, how does competition show up in my life and is it serving me? So personally, I mean, for me, just being able to start that conversation is really important, because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but especially 5 years ago, I needed it in my own life, right? Like I was very much like, there's a very narrow definition of success. I'm burning myself out to get there. And so being in a community of people who are asking this question too, I think is really important to me and a marker of success.
I feel like some of it is about being bold and defiant in your own life, right? Like just like the title, you came up with Uncompete. It's a very bold and defiant word. Like just stop, uncompete out there. And I feel like you just have to do that for yourself, right? And most people don't look inward. They're so busy, so they don't have to look inward, right? And then they forget, like, hey, I'm not happy. They realize they're not happy, but then they forget, I don't even know how to make myself happy. I don't even know how to find fulfillment. And I think this book will lead people to at least starting the process, start to think about it. So if you could give listeners one act today, one act of resistance to not compete, to move out of the system that forces us to compete, what would you recommend?
Wow, this is such a big question, and I didn't prepare for it. I think for me, I would say always the most important thing is to check in with your body. And I know it sounds a little bit woo-woo, especially on a leadership podcast, but I think it's really important for us when we think about work, like how I think our bodies give us clues. And by the way, speaking as someone who has ignored almost every clue at every difficult moment in my life from my body. Literally, I mean, I remember at one job where I was absolutely miserable, I had a back spasm where I almost had to be carried out on a stretcher. And I was in my 20s, FYI, right? Like there was no reason for why that had to happen. And I was otherwise in great health. And I refused to put two and two together. I went to the doctor, said, what's the heaviest medication you can prescribe me? And can I get back to work tomorrow? And I think I did. I think I went back to work the next day. So please remember this as I tell you this piece of advice of like, if there's one piece of advice that I wish we could all take away, it's like, how do we feel in our body when we're at work? What are those moments that make us feel excited and feel like we're joyful and we feel that joy in our body? And what are the moments that give us so much of stress, and what are ways we can mitigate that? I think is so important.
And I've had that back spasm as well. And I've also laid up with my computer in my bed. So I hear you, and we just ignore what's going on. You just said joy. And I before we end, I just want to acknowledge, you talk in the book, there's a whole chapter on this, choosing joy. Is it really that simple? Do we just choose joy? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think choosing joy is really an act of resistance. And I think one of the people who have inspired me the most is actually, she is a doctor. So she's an MD doctor, Dr. Tanmeet Sethi. She wrote a beautiful book called Joy is My Justice. And she wrote it sharing vulnerably the story of her beautiful son, Zubin, who has been diagnosed with a fatal disease and was diagnosed with it when he was very young. And having met, Tanmeet and Zubin and being, and feeling so enriched by both of their companies, what I've realized is actually it really is a choice, and not all of us get to choose the circumstances that we have. Not all of us get to choose, the workplace that we work for. Not all of us have the choice. In fact, because of systems of oppression, capitalism, late stage capitalism, etc., many of us don't have a choice to leave toxic workplaces. But we can choose joy. It's not simple. It's not easy. It's not the default. And yet when we do, and that can be, again, for me, joy has been community and really finding people who are my people, right? And going and really investing in that community. Again, even when workplaces don't make it easy to do so because you're supposed to dedicate so much time to work. Joy could mean, and I write about this, it's my favorite time of the year in Seattle when it's summer and and I sink my teeth into a juicy peach, especially growing up in a country where we didn't get 4 seasons in Singapore. So now awaiting eagerly peach season in Seattle, stone fruit season in Seattle is joyous to me. And I think that is a little act of resistance we can do to stay centered as a true north in a world that doesn't make that easy for us at all.
Choose joy, everybody. That's what she's saying. Choose it. Ruchika, this has been enlightening. Your book is amazing. I am going to recommend it to everybody I know because it just resonated with me so incredibly deeply. The book is Uncompete. It is out at this point. It came out yesterday. Super exciting. Do tell me, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Thank you. The best way is uncompetebook.com. So Uncompete is UN. It's a made-up word, UNCOMPETE book.com. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. And hopefully people will pick up the book and become as enlightened as I became after reading your book.
Thank you, Marlo. You're a gem. I appreciate you so much for hosting this conversation.
Oof! What an important conversation with Ruchika Malhotra. I hope this episode helped you pause and ask yourself, what does success really mean to me? And am I chasing mine or someone else's? If you're a leader, this is your challenge. Name and address competition where it exists and start creating space for collaboration and abundance. That's how true innovation and joy begin. Next week on Work Unscripted, we're talking about boundaries. Yes, those scary things we all tend to avoid, or we set and then let people run all over them. Tune in to find out how to protect your time and energy at work and in life this holiday season. This isn't theory. We're talking actual language to use to set boundaries and hold them. Until then, stay unscripted. Work Unscripted is produced and edited in partnership with the team at Palm Tree Podco and 21 Digby. The content for this week's episode was created by me, Marlo Lyons.